All right, so it is Monday. What is the date? October 12th, as I look at my calendar just to make sure. And we are holding a live session of AP Psychology. I have Michaela here, who it appears is going to get one-on-one instruction since right now we don't have anybody else here, but we might have some more pop-ins. But let's talk really quickly about what we have going on this week. So I'm going to share my screen for just one moment. All right, Michaela, are you able to see that on your screen? Okay, awesome. So you'll see that you have some crash course videos to watch this week, which are pretty interesting, how we make memories, remembering and forgetting. And that's what's really cool about this week is that we're looking at chapter 6, which has everything to do with memories, which is really neat when you start looking into it, how we make memories, how our memories can change over time. It's just really interesting. And then you have a discussion, the 7 sins of memory, and this is kind of cool because it requires you to read an article from the American Psychological Association talking about both the negatives and positives associated with memory. You know, and memory is one of those things where some of us will say, oh, I have a great memory. I can always remember what happened. I can always remember what's going on. But what we don't realize is that most of the time, what we're remembering is not exactly what happened. Okay, some of us, when we play back or for most of us, when we play back our memory, like, okay, let's say you had a disagreement with someone last night. So you've spent all day today rehashing the argument. And in your mind, you're almost playing it like a movie. But what you don't realize is that without knowing it, you're actually editing it in your head. So sometimes you think things happened that didn't happen. You might add things to the memory. You might take away things from the memories. And that's why when we talked a couple weeks ago about hypnotism, that state of consciousness where you're more susceptible to suggestion, you'll have people who suddenly come out of hypnosis and they're like, oh, I remember exactly what happened. But it's because they were so susceptible to suggestion that perhaps if someone is suggesting that an event happened the way that it did, the person will remember it that way, even if they didn't originally remember it that way, okay? So that's pretty cool. And then you'll see that you have a chapter 5 and 6 quiz. So I've combined memory with learning, which I kind of think go hand in hand. You know, that idea of being able to actually learn, and then the idea of memory, being able to remember what we've learned, because it doesn't make any sense to learn something if we don't remember it, okay? So that's kind of why we're talking about remembering and forgetting this week and things like that. And then if you have not yet completed the Hybrid Learning Consortium Fall Midterm Survey, please do so. You just go through, click on all of the information, and then please do not forget to click Submit at the very end. All right, so Michaela, since you're my only person here, you don't have any questions about what we have going on this week? I know you said you're pretty much done for the week, so that's awesome. Okay, so tonight, I wanted to take a look at memories. So give me a second, and I'm going to share my screen. All right, Michaela, are you able to see the PowerPoint in front of you? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is kind of one of the things that I just mentioned, but if we're talking about memory, you know, some of us think, oh, I have a really good memory. Others of us, you know, those of us who work, you know, it just depends on what's going on. I work a full-time job, and I'm raising 2 children, and I have my husband to take care of. Sometimes I blame my lack of memory on being so busy, okay? So the question then is, do you ever find yourself remembering something differently than someone else does? And this is what's really cool. Find a common event and talk to a person and see if they remember what happened differently than how you remembered it happening, okay? Now, sometimes we know that our experiences are going to be different. For example, a lot of times you'll hear your grandparents or maybe your parents. I have my dad just turned 60. So my mom's 58. And one of the conversations that will come up sometime is, where were you the day that Kennedy was shot? Okay. For my generation in particular, it's, what were you doing on 9/11? Okay. So all of us have different memories. Okay. Now, then there are other instances where, say, you and a friend, heaven forbid, are in a car accident. And when it is over with, the police are asking you what happened. You might remember what happened differently than your friend. And that's totally normal, actually. Okay? So as new memories are created, your old memories can actually get a little lost. But instead of getting lost completely, they're more likely to be changed or altered in some way. So the idea of past memories changing over time, that doesn't mean they necessarily go away completely, but they might alter significantly. And we know that in reality, memories are never really that accurate. And as more time goes on, there will be more and more inaccuracies that will actually creep up. And we see this when it comes to witnesses of crime. And one of the women that we're going to look at this evening is a woman by the name of Elizabeth Loftus. And she's been kind of in the forefront of providing evidence for what's called the constructive processing view of memory retrieval. Okay? She believes that memories are literally built or constructed. Think of it like a house. Okay? Memories are built from the information that we stored away during encoding. But then over time, those memories can change. And sometimes we have what's called hindsight bias. Have you ever heard the saying, hindsight is 20/20? The idea that if we look at a bad situation after it's happened, our hindsight is 20/20. We see perfectly what was going to happen. Oh yeah, why didn't we see that coming? This was in place, this was in place, this is in place. We should have known that something bad was going to happen. Okay? So sometimes with hindsight bias, our memories are affected over time. We hear someone say, oh, the driver that hit those two girls in the car was around 35 years old. He was a white male and about 6'2". Now, originally, the girls only said, I don't know, I think he was white. But as soon as they overhear someone say, yeah, middle-aged, white male, 6'2", suddenly they can now see it in their head. And even if they didn't originally see it, they now think they saw it. Does that make sense? So now that memory of the blurry white man's car hitting them becomes the middle-aged white man that they can see perfectly coming straight at them. Okay, so it's called hindsight bias. And a lot of people assume that our memories play like an instant replay. You watch sports games and they go back and they watch exactly what happened. That's not how our memories work. They do not replay in our mind exactly as they've happened. Every single time we retrieve a memory, it may be altered in some way. It may include new information. It may exclude details. Okay? It's kind of like new reconstruction. Okay? We build those memories. So then we have some memory retrieval problems that are pretty, that are talked about quite widely in the academic community. The first is called the misinformation effect. Okay, and this is kind of what I said about the car accident. False memories being created by a person after being exposed to information after the event. When you are originally in the car accident, you don't remember who hit you. But as soon as you hear that other information, you feel like you can see it in your mind. You feel like you're seeing it in your memory. And that misleading information can become a part of your actual memory. Every time you then think of the car accident, you will see the person as described by the witness. And it can affect your memory's accuracy. Then we have false memory syndrome, which is the creation of inaccurate or false memories through the suggestion of others, often while a person is under hypnosis. And this is one of those reasons that we talk about hypnosis being so controversial, is because in that altered state of consciousness, you are so susceptible to being misled. So you may have some memory of a traumatic event, but then after going hypnosis, and after it being suggested to you that you might have more information, you might think you're suddenly remembering things about the event when you're not actually remembering things about the event, okay? So those people who think they have total recall and can recall something exactly as it happened, they think their memories are more accurate than others when they're really not. Okay? So I want to look at a TED Talk, and this is about 17 minutes long. And this is actually a talk by Elizabeth Loftus. And she actually presents a real world example of how reliable our memories can actually be or not be in this case. So we're going to take about 17 minutes to look at this. Please take notes while you're taking a look at this so that then we can talk about it when we're done. And then we'll kind of wrap up. Okay? Any questions before I start that, Michaela? Can you hear it?
I'd like to tell you about a legal case that I worked on involving a man named Steve Titus. Titus was a restaurant manager. He was 31 years old. He lived in Seattle, Washington. He was engaged to Gretchen, about to be married. She was the love of his life. And one night, the couple went out for a romantic restaurant meal. They were on their way home, and they were pulled over by a police officer. You see, Titus's car sort of resembled a car that was driven earlier in the evening by a man who raped a female hitchhiker. And Titus kind of resembled that rapist. So the police took a picture of Titus. They put it in a photo lineup. They later showed it to the victim. And she pointed to Titus's photo. She said, "That one's the closest." The police and the prosecution proceeded with a trial. And when Steve Titus was put on trial for rape, the rape victim got on the stand and said, "I'm absolutely positive that's the man." And Titus was convicted. He proclaimed his innocence. His family screamed at the jury. His fiancée collapsed on the floor sobbing, and Titus is taken away to jail. So what would you do at this point? What would you do? Well, Titus lost complete faith in the legal system. And yet he got an idea. He called up the local newspaper. He got the interest of an investigative journalist. And that journalist actually found the real rapist. A man who ultimately confessed to this rape. A man who was thought to have committed 50 rapes in that area. And when this information was given to the judge set Titus free. And really, that's where this case should have ended. It should have been over. Titus should have thought of this as a horrible year, a year of accusation and trial, but over. It didn't end that way. Titus was so bitter. He'd lost his job. He couldn't get it back. He lost his fiancée. She couldn't put up with his persistent anger. He lost his entire savings. And so he decided to file a lawsuit against the police and others who he felt were responsible for his suffering. And that's when I really started working on this case, trying to figure out how did that victim go from "that one's the closest" to "I'm absolutely positive that's the guy." Well, Titus was consumed with his civil case as he spent every waking moment thinking about it. And just days before he was to have his day in court, he woke up in the morning, doubled over in pain, and died of a stress-related heart attack. He was 35 years old. So I was asked to work on Titus's case because I'm a psychological scientist. I study memory. I've studied memory for decades. And if I meet somebody on an airplane, this happened on the way over to Scotland, if I meet somebody on an airplane and we ask each other, what do you do, what do you do? And I say, I study memory. They usually want to tell me how they have trouble remembering names, or they've got a relative who's got Alzheimer's or some kind of memory problem. But I have to tell them, I don't study when people forget. I study the opposite, when they remember things that didn't happen or remember things that were different from the way they really were. I study false memories. Unhappily, Steve Titus is not the only person to be convicted based on somebody's false memory. In one project in the United States, information has been gathered on 300 innocent people, 300 defendants who were convicted of crimes they didn't do. They spent 10, 20, 30 years in prison for these crimes, and now DNA testing has proven that they're actually innocent. And when those cases have been analyzed, 3/4 of them are due to faulty memory, faulty eyewitness memory. Well, why? Like the jurors who convicted those innocent people and the jurors who convicted Titus, many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people. I first started studying this constructive memory process in the 1970s. I did my experiments that involved showing people simulated crimes and accidents and asking them questions about what they remember. In one study, we showed people a simulated accident, and we asked people how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. And we asked other people how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. And if we asked the leading smash question, the witnesses told us the cars were going faster. And moreover, that leading smash question caused people to be more likely to tell us that they saw broken glass in the accident scene when there wasn't any broken glass at all. In another study, we showed a simulated accident where a car went through an intersection with a stop sign, and if we asked a question that insinuated it was a yield sign, many witnesses told us they remember seeing a yield sign at the intersection, not a stop sign. And you might be thinking, well, these are filmed events, they're not particularly stressful. Would the same kind of mistakes be made with a really stressful event? In a study we published just a few months ago, we have an answer to this question. Because what was unusual about this study is we arranged for people to have a very stressful experience. The subjects in the study were members of the U.S. military who were undergoing a harrowing training exercise to teach them what it's going to be like for them if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. And as part of this training exercise, these soldiers are interrogated in an aggressive, hostile, physically abusive fashion for 30 minutes. And later on, they have to try to identify the person who conducted that interrogation. And when we feed them suggestive information that insinuates it's a different person, many of them misidentify their interrogator, often identifying someone who doesn't even remotely resemble the real interrogator. And so what these studies are showing is that when you feed people misinformation about some experience that they may have had, you can distort or contaminate or change their memory. Well, out there in the real world, Misinformation is everywhere. We get misinformation not only if we're questioned in a leading way, but if we talk to other witnesses who might consciously or inadvertently feed us some erroneous information, or if we see media coverage about some event we might have experienced. All of these provide the opportunity for this kind of contamination of our memory. In the 1990s, we began to see an even more extreme kind of memory problem. Some patients were going into therapy with one problem, maybe they had depression, eating disorder, and they were coming out of therapy with a different problem. Extreme memories for horrific brutalization, sometimes in satanic rituals, sometimes involving really bizarre and unusual elements. One woman came out of psychotherapy believing that she'd endured years of ritualistic abuse, where she was forced into a pregnancy and that the baby was cut from her belly. But there were no physical scars or any kind of physical evidence that could have supported her story. And when I began looking into these cases, I was wondering, where do these bizarre memories come from? And what I found is that most of these situations involved some particular form of psychotherapy. And so I asked, were some of the things going on in this psychotherapy, like the imagination exercises, or dream interpretation, or in some cases hypnosis, or in some cases exposure to false information, were these leading these patients to develop these very bizarre, unlikely memories? And I designed some experiments to try to study the processes that were being used in this psychotherapy so I could study the development of these very rich false memories. In one of the first studies we did, we used suggestion, a method inspired by the psychotherapy we saw in these cases. We used this kind of suggestion and planted a false memory that when you were a kid, 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall. You were frightened, you were crying, you were ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And we succeeded in planting this memory in the minds of about a quarter of our subjects. And you might be thinking, well, that's not particularly stressful. But we and other investigators have planted rich false memories of things that were much more unusual and much more stressful. So in a study done in Tennessee, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, you nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard. And in a study done in Canada, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, something as awful as being attacked by a vicious animal happened to you, succeeding with about half of their subjects. And in a study done in Italy, researchers planted the false memory when you were a kid, you witnessed demonic possession. I do want to add that it might seem like we are traumatizing these experimental subjects in the name of science, but our studies have gone through thorough evaluation by research ethics boards that have made the decision that the temporary discomfort that some of these subjects might experience in these studies is outweighed by the importance of this problem for understanding memory processes and the abuse of memory that is going on in some places in the world. Well, to my surprise, when I published this work and began to speak out against this particular brand of psychotherapy, it created some pretty bad problems for me. Hostilities primarily from the repressed memory therapists who felt under attack and by the patients whom they had influenced. I had sometimes armed guards at speeches that I was invited to give, people trying to drum up letter writing campaigns to get me fired. But probably the worst was I suspected that a woman was innocent of abuse that was being claimed by her grown daughter. She accused her mother of sexual abuse based on a repressed memory. And this accusing daughter had actually allowed her story to be filmed and presented in public places. I was suspicious of this story, and so I started to investigate and eventually found information that convinced me that this mother was innocent. I published an expose on the case, and a little while later, the accusing daughter filed a lawsuit. Even though I'd never mentioned her name, she sued me for defamation and invasion of privacy. And I went through nearly 5 years of dealing with this messy, unpleasant litigation. But finally, it was over, and I could really get back to my work. In the process, however, I became part of a disturbing trend in America where scientists are being sued for simply speaking out on matters of great public controversy. When I got back to my work, I asked this question: if I plant a false memory in your mind, does it have repercussions? Does it affect your later thoughts, your later behaviors? Our first study planted a false memory that you got sick as a child, eating certain foods, hard-boiled eggs, dill pickles, strawberry ice cream, and we found that once we planted this false memory, people didn't want to eat the foods as much at an outdoor picnic. The false memories aren't necessarily bad or unpleasant. If we planted a warm, fuzzy memory involving a healthy food like asparagus, we could get people to want to eat asparagus more. And so what these studies are showing is that you can plant false memories and they have repercussions that affect behavior long after the memories take hold. Well, along with this ability to plant memories and control behavior, obviously comes some important ethical issues. Like, when should we use this mind technology, and should we ever ban its use? Therapists can't ethically plant false memories in the mind of their patients, even if it would help the patient. But there's nothing to stop a parent from trying this out on their overweight or obese teenager. And when I suggested this publicly, it created outcry again. There she goes. She's advocating that parents lie to their children. Hello, Santa Claus. I mean, another way another way to think about this is, which would you rather have? A kid with obesity, diabetes, shortened lifespan, all the things that go with it, or a kid with one little extra bit of false memory? I know what I would choose for a kid of mine. But maybe my work has made me different from most people. Most people cherish their memories, know that they represent their identity, who they are, where they came from. And I appreciate that. I feel that way too. But I know from my work how much fiction is already in there. If I've learned anything from these decades of working on these problems, it's this: just because somebody tells you something and they say it with confidence, just because they say it with lots of detail, just because they express emotion when they say it, it doesn't mean that it really happened. We can't reliably distinguish true memories from false memories. We need independent corroboration. Such a discovery has made me more tolerant of the everyday memory mistakes that my friends and family members make. Such a discovery might have saved Steve Titus, the man whose whole future was snatched away by a false memory. But meanwhile, we should all keep in mind, we do well to, that memory, like liberty, is a fragile thing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So I really like listening to her speak because she kind of talks about the controversy behind repressed memories, but she also talks about what happens when people are asked in traumatic events to identify their attackers and things like that. And, you know, I think it's interesting. You heard her say at the beginning, well, he looks the closest. You know, you would think that would have been a red flag to someone that, well, he doesn't look exactly like the one who attacked me, but he looks the closest. So those are things that are taken into consideration when police do things like lineups, okay? So just to kind of then wrap up, let's take a look. Michaela, did you have anything that you wanted to share as a result of anything you found interesting about the video?
I mean, I like the video, and I liked what she said, that memory is like a fragile thing. And just, I don't know, just when, just basically what you said about the guy's like, oh, he looks the closest. That can completely change everything, basically.
Yeah. And you think about, you think about the effects that your actions can have on other people. Have you ever met someone who is so dead set that they are right every single time, that they remembered it correctly, that they know exactly what happened, and they'd be willing to bet their life on it? And yet what they don't realize is that they're probably not as accurate as they'd like to think they are. So, you remember I told you at the beginning of this course, you're never going to look at people the same way. You're never going to look at yourself the same way. So from now on, anytime anyone asks you to remember something, you're going to ask yourself, am I remembering that correctly? It's things to think about, okay? So to kind of wrap up and looking at the reconstructive nature of long-term memory, being able to find those memories, we know that memories are very rarely completely accurate, and that they actually become less accurate over time. That's not to mean that your memories are entirely false. It just means that they become less accurate over time. And Elizabeth Loftus and others have actually suggested that memory retrieval is a constructive process, meaning that memories are built at the time of retrieval. So when you pull a memory from your mind, you're not pulling it as it happened. Okay, it's like pulling a story from your mind, and it can change over time. And then we have to worry about things like the misinformation effect and the reliability of memory retrieval. Okay, so the misinformation effect, the incorporation of inaccurate information into our actual memories. And then false memories can result from a change in both waking, conscious states, and in altered states. So that idea of things like hypnosis, being easily influenced in an altered state of consciousness. Okay? And when we hear the feedback of other people, that can impact our memories as well. So yeah, that kind of wraps up our little discussion on memory. Michaela, do you have any questions before you get on with your evening?
No, I don't.
Thank you so much for stopping by. It's like you're getting one-on-one instruction. Do you have any questions about anything we've been going over so far? You can kind of use this time to ask if you have any questions.
No, not so far. I think I'm good for now.
Okay. Well, you can email me if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming by, and you have a great evening, okay?
Okay.
All right. Bye, Michaela.
Okay, bye.
Bye.